Sean Durkin, our director, he came at this story with so much passion and a real personal perspective that comes from being a fan. And in these relationships, he was able to sort of tell the story with nuance and with love. It feels great. It feels really special. It's just so rewarding.
It did seem kind of like the Wild West. I think like it wasn't quite as structured as it might be today. And I think it was still discovering itself. What was really nice and interesting about the story, aside from like how fascinating these characters alone are, was how I feel that they are kind of responsible for the way that the sport has like shifted and kind of become what it is today.
That became apparent as we were talking to professional wrestlers today. And when they talk about the impact that watching the Von Erichs had on them, and they were fans of theirs growing up, and these guys changed the dynamic of the sport in such a big way. It was so fun to go back and step into this specific era.
Yeah, I also think that like the limited amount of media consumption and lack of cell phones back in the day probably added to like the camaraderie of coming to like a place like the Sportatorium.
Sure, and like mythicism too.
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
sure.
And then also like coming together and bringing people together, and they're genuine fans for a reason, because you know they got, this was like a time, like a place to experience an awesome event.
As a wrestling fan, I love the details, you know, and I love the minutia of the details. I love what the state of things are in 1986 and who's doing what, you know what I mean? So from a wrestling history standpoint, it was hard sometimes to let go of those details. In some ways, it's sort of the way in for me into this is like, you've got guys in the middle of the ring who are enacting the ultimate show of pain. It ultimately came down to emotion, and just trying to create something that was emotionally truthful, both to the family and to Kevin's journey of survival, as well as the emotion of being a wrestler in this world and how to outwardly portray your emotions versus what you were actually feeling.
To know Kevin's out there in Hawaii with his family, living a life full of love, it really brings the whole story home. There's like a whole other chapter that we don't really have in the film, but is out there happening right now. Totally. And that's just, it's Kevin, man. It brings it all home for us. It's great.